I will be exploring the film theory of masculinity by comparing Barry Jenkins' 2016 film Moonlight with Jean-Marc Vallée's 2013 film Dallas Buyers Club. These two films are worthy of study as they show how different socioeconomic backgrounds and racial influences can impact one's idea of masculinity. Moonlight represents African American masculine ideas of the 80s in impoverished Black communities, whereas Dallas Buyers Club displays masculinity in the context of the primarily white American South. Moonlight explores the struggles of Black males who fall into heavily marginalized masculinities such as gay men opposed to the more widely accepted homogeneous idea of masculinity. Dallas Buyers Club challenges this idea of homogeneous masculinity while also addressing the stigma of AIDS that was pervasive throughout the time period in which both movies are set. Both include themes regarding the culture of masculinity and the consequent marginalization of those who do not fall into the confines of that culture. Moonlight is an American coming-of-age drama based on Terrell Alvin McCraney's unpublished semi-autobiographical play In Moonlight Black Boys Look Blue. The film presents 3 stages in the life of the main character, Chiron: his youth, adolescence, and early adult life. It explores the difficulties he faces in accepting his sexual identity in fear of rejection and social exclusion. The movie is set in the impoverished Liberty City area of Miami. Home to one of the largest concentrations of African Americans in South Florida, Liberty City is considered by many to be one of the most dangerous parts of Miami. We see in Moonlight how Chiron's harsh environment pushes him to adopt the masculine ideas of surroundings to escape not only living in poverty, but also the harsh judgment and abuse of his peers. The type of masculinity presented in Moonlight is in accordance to the archetype often portrayed in film of the thug, who is more often than not played by a young man of color. Black men specifically are often pigeonholed into these overtly aggressive roles because aggression is seen as one of the main pillars of African American masculinity in America. Contrastly, the masculinity presented in Dallas Buyers Club is more often portrayed by white men and is characterized by recklessness. Key proponents of it include excessive drinking, drug use, the degradation of women, as well as just general careless behavior. We see these characteristics presented in the main character of Dallas Buyers Club towards the beginning of the movie, but as he rethinks his values, he begins to step away from the hegemonic masculinity of his environment. Dallas Buyers Club was also set in the 80s, but has a much different racial demographic, being set in the primarily white rodeo scene of Dallas, Texas. It is an American biographical drama about Ron Woodruff, an AIDS patient who had just been diagnosed when the disease had only recently been discovered and treatments were still severely under-researched. As part of the experimental AIDS treatment movement, he smuggled unapproved pharmaceutical drugs into Texas for treating his symptoms and distributed them to fellow people with AIDS by establishing the Dallas Buyers Club while facing opposition from the Food and Drug Administration. Through the film, we see Ron reevaluate his idea of masculinity as he forms a relationship with the people he would have previously rejected due to the culture of masculinity of his environment, looks down on members of the LGBTQ community. In film studies, as in other disciplines and in cultures at large, masculinity remains a heavily contested category since it is tied not only to dominant social values but also to marginal groups and practices. Consideration of the general idea of masculinity consistently involves discussion of sexuality or race. For example, approaches to masculinity in genre films often involve claims about cultural context, such as seen in both Moonlight and Dallas Buyers Club. Cultural representations of males in film represent behavioral ideas for men in a culture in a particular time period. Although the two movies are set in the same time period, they have varying depictions of masculinity in accordance with their distinct cultures and values. We are introduced to some of the aspects of the different cultures of both the movies in their opening scenes. Moonlight's opening scene introduces the setting of the streets of Miami, Florida, with a drug deal to establish the atmosphere, and the use of an arc shot between the drug dealer and the person trying to buy the drugs exposes the scene's background as a poor Black neighborhood with sirens blaring in the distance. We are introduced to Juan, who seems to run the drug scene in the area and consequently receives a high level of respect.
Yeah, I'm just out here, regular day. It's in the car, everything cleaned out if you need it.
Is this good?
Yeah, it's good. I got something for you.
No, hold on to that. Empty the register on the weekend.
This association of respect with selling drugs is one of the facets of masculinity in this culture. The opening scene of Dallas Buyers Club is the rodeo, which epitomizes Southern culture and the environment Ron is living in. This environment, especially bull riding, reflects the rough and tumble masculinity that is ideal in the South. We see further examples of behavioral ideas for men in the respective cultures of the two movies, with scenes that display how men in each environment interact with each other. One of the first scenes of Moonlight shows a group of black boys playing a game together in a field. There's a lot of physical interaction between these boys, and the panning shot evokes a sense of connection between them. Eventually, we see they are grouped together still playing, while Sharon is isolated from the group off to the side. The separation of Sharon from the boys while they are playing this highly physical, masculine game represents Sharon's rejection from the male collective because he fails to fall into their homogeneous idea of masculinity, which is characterized by high levels of physicality and aggression.
All you gotta do, show these niggas you ain't soft.
But I ain't soft.
I know. But it don't mean nothing if they don't know.
Since Chiron does not fit this stereotype, he is considered soft. This shows that it is important in the masculine culture presented in Moonlight to aggressively assert yourself in order to gain respect. We see an interaction between the males in Dallas Buyers Club when Ron is talking to the men he works with about sex. We were initially introduced to Ron with a scene showing him have sex with two women, and in this scene with his work friends, we can see that objectifying women is a way that men bond. It is clear that sexual prowess is an important facet of the masculine culture presented in Dallas Buyers Club, because it is considered to highlight their heterosexuality, which is a necessary proponent in belonging to the hegemonic masculine group that is accepted in this environment. Furthermore, through this sexually domineering speech seemingly common in this environment, we see that men who exemplify the idea of dominant masculinity are those who are involved in the subordination of women and of men who represent marginalized masculinities. While this scene in Dallas Buyers Club reflects the subordination of women as objects for sex, in Moonlight we see the subordination of the marginalized group of gay men who are even more heavily ostracized in black communities, which is seen by Chiron's treatment in Moonlight. Specifically, in one of the last scenes in the second stage of Chiron's life, and a clear turning point before he adopts the identity of black, Chiron is being bullied for being part of this marginalized group. One of Chiron's classmates, who had previously been established as his friend, is being forced to adopt the same behavior of his male peers and reject Chiron in order to be accepted into the hegemonic male group. It is the director's intent in this scene to capture Chiron's strength with extreme close-ups of his face that show his hard-set gaze as he gets up every time he is hit. With this, the director is communicating that a man's strength does not correlate in any way to his sexual orientation. This rejection by someone that Chiron was close to contributes to his adoption of his later life persona, Black. Black embodies all the characteristics idealized in black masculinity that Chiron was shunned for not having. These include aggression, dominance, and respect, specifically gained through selling drugs, and the rejection of most observable emotions besides anger. As previously mentioned, these are the characteristics that are highlighted commonly in film to portray black men. Contrastly, in this scene of Dallas Buyers Club, we see Ron oppose the male collective's treatment of people of the LGBTQ community. Ron had previously been rejected from the male collective after being diagnosed with AIDS, and in this scene, he chooses not to conform to the masculine ideas of his environment that would have him reject the people that he has now become close to since his diagnosis. Although he is dominating the other person physically in this scene, which coincides with the ideas of masculinity, he is doing this out of compassion for Rayon, which is in contrast. In conclusion, both Moonlight and Dallas Buyers Club show the effects of hegemonic masculinity as they are presented in different cultures and races, yet they diverge in the way in which characters react to social pressures to conform to this masculinity. Although the pressure is the same, the pillars of masculinity differ in accordance to the socioeconomic and racial atmosphere in which it is presented.